going to wear a helmet on your e-scooter, aren't you, Wallace? I know it. I know that's what you're going to do next. You're putting a helmet on. Come on now.
Probably.
Come on now.
Well, actually, no. I'm outside the box with I'm actually waiting for a mobility scooter because I love them.
Well, you're going to move to Tauranga. You're going to move to my territory, mate. Come to my tangata whenua, bruv. Defo.
I sometimes drive the ride-on lawnmower down to the pub in Kimbolton.
I would love one of those.
Yeah. That's my mobility scooter.
But let me tell you, both of you, do you think that the e-scooter? I mean, a year ago we would not have heard of them. Do you think it's encouraged people to think a bit more about modes of travel beyond the car? That there might be another way of taking that short distance that I would otherwise use the car for, Lavina.
I do. We've just adopted this word in Tauranga over the last year that you guys have been using in Auckland for a very long time, and it starts with a T, and it's called traffic, and we're having an issue with it in Tauranga, and it's something that we've always been very proud of, saying we don't have traffic issues, we're not going to talk about traffic all the time, but lately I'm like, hey, how's your day? Oh, the traffic's terrible. What have you been up to? Gee, the traffic's bad. And the concept of having a scooter in Tauranga where you can zip through that traffic on a safe form of transport. The only issue for me is that I can't put 7 children on my scooter, unfortunately, because I've got 3 of my own and always a couple of their friends. And until they can hop on a scooter, life won't be sorted when it comes to traffic. But I think we need to look outside the square, especially with petrol prices being horrendously expensive at the moment and going up by the litre, by the cent, by the litre daily. If we can look at other modes of transport, I'm all for it. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Look, the democratisation of what was once a very short time ago high-end, inaccessible technology is what's called disruptive innovation. We can't stop it. We should encourage it. And I think this could be the answer to many problems. Traffic congestion and carbon footprint are two such examples.
Very interesting. And on that, 15 kilometres is fast enough when scooters are sharing footpaths. I've used an e-scooter a few times, know someone knocked by a scooter going on the wrong side of the road.
Wallace, you run faster than that. You run faster than 15k.
Yes.
Come on now.
It's not a whole lot of fast, is it? Wallace, I went into a car part supplier and asked for 2 wiper blades for my 1974 Lancia. He goes, ooh, so it sounds like a fair swap. Cheers, Stuart. Panel, I'd be curious to know what the effect of fees-free has been on the mental health of the affected students. I know for my child, the ability to start university without having to find fees money straight up was an enormous relief. And without the fees-free would be probably not have started university. Free or cheaper tertiary education is not just about vocational training. It allows our children to pursue education for the joy of education. And quickly on that note, I mean, Chris, I can recall my first receipt at university, and it was $167. And I do kind of feel for the students of today having to be lumbered with massive fees.
No, absolutely agree. I mean, I've been a broken record on the fact that we're raising a neurotic generation that has got so much pressure on them that they'll likely be burnt out by the age of 30. I'm absolutely for free fees for university. In fact, you can read it in my book that's coming out later in the year on the future of the university.
Do you have
what was that name again? What was that, Chris?
The future of the university.
I'm just writing that down. Got it. Future of the university.
I have a very, very clear vision of the future university. That's why I want to be a Vice-Chancellor. There you go. I've said it on RNZ.
Aren't you one already?
Not the boss.
Oh, right, okay.
Right. Just about there, mate.
Watch the space.
The future of the university. Can't wait.
Not the universe. Don't get those confused.
No, that's the next book.
You've been a wonderful panel. Lavina.
Thanks, Lavina. Thanks, Lavina. Thanks, Wallace.
See you later. See you tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, has Facebook done an about-face on its live streaming service? Or is it all just PR and no punch? Is it time for widespread random testing for drug driving, and could it make our roads safer? The government's looking to beef up the testing regime ahead of the cannabis referendum. We talked to the Associate Transport Minister. And 51 measles cases and climbing. The outbreaks now prompted a petition for compulsory vaccinations for children. An alleged war criminal is found in plain sight. He's behind the wheel of an Uber in the US. And the final waka journey, master waka builder and navigator, Sir Hekenuki Mai Busby, is buried in the far north. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Moves by Facebook to tighten the rules around live streaming in direct response to the Christchurch terror attacks have been described as a PR exercise. The company has announced that people who break certain rules will be restricted from using Facebook Live for a set period of time. It comes as world leaders gather in Paris following a call by the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to discuss online violence. But New Zealand tech commentator Paul Breslin says it's a token measure and scant on detail.
There's no word on what the rules are, so that makes it very difficult to determine whether or not posts and video content are in breach of the rules. It doesn't say what's the minimum duration. And again, that wouldn't change Gunman's video on the day because, of course, even if they banned him for life, it wouldn't make much difference to the people who had seen the video.
Tech commentator Paul Breslin. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has responded to Facebook's announcement, saying it's a good first step to stop live streaming service being used as a tool by terrorists. A man whose father died in the Al Noor Mosque believes involving the families of the victims in the Royal Commission into the Christchurch mosque shootings would only re-traumatise them. Auckland University of Technology professor Chris Glenhill has said the Commission needs to give victims and their families a more prominent voice. But Yama Nabi says many of the families he's spoken to just want to move on with their lives.
What's the point talking about it? They can't tell, like, for example, what's going to happen next week or like that. It's not a crystal ball that they can read everything, what's going on. So it's just a waste of time. They're just going to give them more grief and hurt them more.
Yamanabe says he would support an investigation into why it took authorities so long to return the victims' bodies to their loved ones. The US state of Alabama is set to sign off on the most restrictive anti-abortion law in the country. A bill which will outlaw nearly all abortions has been approved by lawmakers and now goes to the Republican governor for final approval. The BBC's Aleem Makboul has the story.
The bill passed here in Alabama makes abortion illegal at any stage of pregnancy. There is an exception for when a mother's life's at serious risk, but there are no other exemptions, even in circumstances of rape or incest. Any doctor who carries out an abortion in the state now risks a prison sentence of 99 years. While opponents say they will challenge the legislation, that's precisely what Republicans behind the bill say they want, hoping it'll be taken up by a Supreme Court that's become far more conservative under Donald Trump and trigger moves that could lead to abortion being banned across this country.
Aleem Makboul in Alabama. As the government seeks public feedback on random roadside testing for drugs, the police minister is reminding people it's not just about illegal substances. A discussion paper has been released as the government considers whether to introduce a tougher regime. It wants feedback on methods that could be used to screen and test drivers and what drugs should be tested for. The Police Minister Stuart Nash says last year 71 people were killed in crashes where a driver was found to have drugs or medication in their system.
About 25% of all legal medication prescribed in this country says do not use this while driving. It is actually illegal to drive while you are taking this medication, so it's not as simple as it may sound.
Stuart Nash. The consultation will run until June 28th, with options to be confirmed at the end of the year. A Whangarei school, which feared more than half of its pupils had never been immunised against measles, has found out that most of them are in fact vaccinated. Hora Hora Primary asked families for vaccination certificates this month to find out how many of its 400 pupils are at risk from the current measles outbreak. But the parents of 250 children had no records. The school's principal, Pat Newman, says after 2 weeks of manual data matching, Northland DHB has confirmed that only about 50 Hora Hora children are unvaccinated. Meanwhile, latest figures show there have been 137 confirmed cases of measles across the country so far this year. A Waihi woman has been prosecuted for docking the tails of 8 Rottweiler puppies in what is a first under new animal welfare regulations. Jennifer King pleaded guilty and has been fined $500. She told the SPCA inspectors she'd docked the puppies' tails without pain relief when they were 2 days old, using imported docking bands. The SPCA's chief executive, Andrea Midgen, says tail docking for cosmetic reasons is banned.
It's only finally with these regulations that came out last year that we have the tools now to deal with it, because practically it's only for aesthetic reasons and definitely not anything good for the animal.
Andrea Midgen says breeders should be up to speed on animal welfare legislation. It's 5:05. The former All Black Dan Carter, Olympic board sailing gold medalist Barbara Kendall, golf champion Lydia Ko and America's Cup winner Glenn Ashby have been formally invested with their Queen's Honours in Auckland today. Carter retired from the All Blacks after the side's 2015 World Cup triumph and was made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit. Kendall has become a companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit, while Ko and Ashby, who skippered Team New Zealand to victory in 2017, were both made members of the New Zealand Order of Merit. Carter wore a neck brace to the ceremony as he's recovering from neck surgery 5 weeks ago, but took it off to receive his medal.
Surgeon said 3 months, so 5 weeks into it. Don't worry, I've been talking pretty closely with Sam Cane and how he had to deal with it, so he's given me some encouragement.
Dan Carter. The Black Caps' new batting coach Peter Fulton says he won't be a yes man. The former international batsman will take over from Craig McMillan after the Cricket World Cup. Fulton has had a long relationship with coach Gary Stead, who he played alongside at Canterbury, but says that doesn't mean they always agree.
One of the strengths of our relationship probably is that we're able to have conversations where we disagree, but then we're able to move on and agree to disagree, so to speak.
Peter Fulton. A hot shooting effort from Steph Curry has powered the Golden State Warriors to a 116-94 win over the Portland Trailblazers in Game 1 of basketball's NBA Western Conference Finals. That's the news.
From Rome to Canberra.
I'm not running for Pope, I'm running for Prime Minister.
From Christchurch to Paris.
Of course, the focus here has been quite specifically around what happened online, the role that tech companies need to play going forward, but also governments.
And from Kaitaia to the world.
And that waka could travel. That waka has taken us to America, has taken us to Spain, has taken us to London, has taken us all over the world.
All the important news at home and overseas. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, efforts to fight Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo are hampered by violence. Is a global health alert needed? And after 10, a frank take on working in the non-profit sector with Voulet, a famously funny US blogger and speaker in the field. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine spells, a few showers clearing south of Waikato tomorrow morning. Rain tomorrow night for Manawatu. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly fine. Rain late tomorrow south of Hastings, briefly heavy. Westerly gales in the south. For Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Mostly fine with west to norwesterly gales in exposed places. Severe about parts of the Canterbury High Country. Expect showers later tomorrow, possibly heavy about the east coast with a strong southerly change. For Bulla and Westland, rain or showers, possibly heavy this afternoon, becoming fine later tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, showers, some heavy. Easing tomorrow afternoon, westerly gales, severe in exposed places. Chatham Islands, showers clearing this afternoon, but returning overnight, some possibly heavy with thunderstorms. It's 5:08. You're with RNZ National. Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Facebook has unveiled new live streaming restrictions on the eve of the Christchurch Call Summit in Paris. The social media giant is under pressure after the Christchurch mosque massacres were live streamed on Facebook. The announcement comes as tech giants and world leaders, led by Jacinda Ardern and Emmanuel Macron, gather in Paris for the summit, looking at how best to prevent extremism on social media. Shortly, we'll speak to our political reporter, Joe Moore, who is in Paris. But first, Paul Spain is a technology commentator and founder of Gorilla Technology, and he's in the Auckland studio with me now. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Lisa.
Do you see this as a really genuine attempt to crack down on problems, or is it just a PR exercise from Facebook?
Look, I think it's probably what Facebook believe is a appropriate change from their side. They admit that they just don't have the technology, and I don't think anybody has the technology to do exactly what is being expected of them to lock down certain content from being displayed within Facebook.
So they are introducing what they're calling basically a one-strike rule. So if you behave badly on Facebook Live, they will take that service away from you. But do we know what behaviour will lead to a ban? Have they been clear on that?
They have listed some guidelines that that will have somebody banned, and I don't think it's just within Facebook Live. It's within the broader Facebook context. So you can get marked as somebody that won't be able to do a live broadcast within Facebook for either a period of time or potentially a permanent ban. But of course, it's worth noting that it's very easy to create a new account on Facebook. There are all sorts of ways to get around these things. And there are a lot of other ways in which people can distribute content today. It's not just Facebook. And I think there's been a huge amount of focus because in this case, Facebook was used. But I would ask the question, well, should we be putting the responsibility on Apple, on Google, on the providers of the software on our phones that can block it at that level? I mean, we're sort of expecting Facebook here maybe to do something that just isn't possible. And I'm not sure if there's any immediate solutions to the level of expectation that I'm seeing reported on.
Is this whack-a-mole then, basically?
I think so. I mean, it's very hard. And if we lock it down so that people have got extra hoops to jump through before they can broadcast, which we've seen with YouTube, then that blocks out a whole lot of people that then can't use these mechanisms because they don't fit into that category of having enough followers or being popular enough.
But is that not just the price of, a better society, some people would argue?
Well, I would say, why isn't society more involved in this, right? So we heard of, Jacinda Ardern was included in those who saw the shooting video. Lots of people saw it, but it wasn't reported back to Facebook of this is horrendous, it should be blocked instantly. Hundreds of people saw it before they got to blocking it. Now, I think there's some responsibility on us as society to actually respond. We've seen changes in workplaces and the way email is used. I remember when email was quite new, the sort of horrendous content that got forwarded around, and people thought it was okay to share various pornography and other things before they recognised that no, this is not acceptable. You're going to lose your job and other things. I think there needs to be personal responsibility here, not just putting it all on Facebook or whatever company is in the spotlight at a given moment.
So a wider cultural shift. But also, I'm wondering about this. This is still ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, isn't it? Because you have to have breached. I mean, can you give us some examples? What is the behaviour that would get you kicked off? Because you have to have done something naughty, bad, distasteful before you get the boot. So it's already happened.
Yeah, so for instance, if you've been shown to share something objectionable and just directly shared that without some commentary that may be that you're challenging it or something else, then that's going to put you in a bad light.
Commentary is subjective though too, is it not?
Well, and that's part of the challenge here, right? We're expecting to sort of draw some sort of line, and how do Facebook decide what that line is? I don't think they can. Can this be decided in Paris? Can we decide what the line is that's appropriate for every country in the world, for a whole lot of countries? I'm not sure. I don't think we're dealing with something easy here.
Yeah, so on your best analysis of what we've been shown today from Facebook, is it workable in your view?
I think it's a positive step forward. I like that they're investing money. They've committed to investing $7.5 million with outside institutions to help on the research that will look out for objectionable content and block it. But there is no technology company today that I believe has the technology that allows us to block in every situation this content.
I was interested in that. $7.5 million, that's ice block money for this company, is it not?
Oh, it is. It's nothing. It's nothing for Facebook.
So would you have anticipated, if you were serious about it and you want to discover the tool to police this, you'd chuck a bit more than 7.5 in?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would like to see more for sure.
Also, I look at this also and I wonder, how is it that this technology company and other technology companies don't already have this tool? Because we're led to believe that they're kind of masters of the internet universe.
Well, we're on a journey with artificial intelligence, and I think the term came up over 50 years ago. And we're part way through that journey. In another 10 or 20 years, what technology will be able to do from an artificial intelligence perspective will be streets ahead of where we are now. But we are in a place now where you use Siri or something on your phone, it doesn't recognise what you say. If I had my phone with me right now, it may have interrupted our conversation because it might have thought I would summons it even before I'd said the word Siri. So, the technology is not perfect just yet. We're very much on a journey. Anybody that uses technology day to day knows that it's average, at best when it comes to artificial intelligence. So, I think our expectations need to, ease up a little bit, and we do need to take some personal responsibility.
Appreciate you joining us in the studio. Paul Swain, technology commentator there. And our political reporter, Jo Moir, is in Paris to cover the summit, and she joins us now. Jo, what do you make of the timing with this Facebook announcement?
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, really? Because I guess, we've been talking for days about the fact that the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg aren't actually showing up for this. They're obviously sending along Nick Clegg in their place. So, this in some ways, I guess, sort of puts them back in the good books. But, as you were just, talking about then, the action would have already happened. This is not preventative by any means. So there's still a much wider issue here, which I guess is what the Christchurch call is going to try to achieve. But, we've also heard from the Prime Minister in the last day over here in Paris that, it's not going to go as far as some tech experts would like in terms of dealing with issues of radicalisation and white supremacy and that sort of thing too. So, I take the point too that it's not a lot of money to be throwing at it, given how much money Facebook has. So, interesting timing indeed, though, on the eve of the summit being signed for sure.
What has the Prime Minister had to say about it?
So she sent through a comment to us just a few minutes ago, actually, and she says it's a good first step and addresses the point of the Christchurch call, which is all about, obviously, technology companies committing to making live stream safer overall. She's acknowledging the fact that they are attempting to do something. They're also obviously pledging to put more research into detecting this manipulated video and images and audio. So she's welcomed that because, obviously she's explained that she was one of these people who inadvertently ended up seeing this video. So any sort of research and work that can be done around making sure that these videos get manipulated and changed and, stay there longer because obviously they're harder to detect and pull down, then that's a step in the right direction as well, she says.
But do you think it's going to be enough to stave off any further criticism?
No, I don't think so. I come back to the point that, Mark Zuckerberg could have turned up here. He was in Paris, a week or so ago anyway. And, the fact that he hasn't decided to come along, neither Sheryl Sandberg either, says something. Because you look at Twitter, for example, and Jack Dorsey, the CEO, is coming along. And, that automatically makes you think, well, Twitter's taking this a little bit more seriously. So, this announcement is obviously going to sort of, puts the Prime Minister in a position to be saying, oh, look, here's Facebook doing something right before we sign up to the summit. But at the end of the day, they're not actually physically here in Paris, really.
So what is actually going to happen at the summit?
So the summit today, basically they sign up to this agreement. So there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes. This has kind of been a 6-week process, really, between officials in New Zealand and tech companies and countries. There's obviously countries who aren't here at the summit in Paris who have actually committed to signing up to it, and I understand that that's the same with some tech companies as well. So what we'll see is the agreement, the Christchurch Call document. We'll see that sort of what it actually is. At the moment, all we know is it's kind of 4 separate categories. You've got sort of the context, the preamble. You've got a section on, I guess, what tech companies' responsibilities are, a section on government responsibilities, and then obviously the 4th section is that sort of collaboration approach from the 2. So we will see at the summit what it actually looks like, and then there will be a press conference following that with Jacinda Ardern and Emmanuel Macron, and we'll get a bit of an indication from them about what might come from this as well.
Thanks, Joe. That's Joe Moir, our political reporter, who is in Paris ahead of that summit. And as she said, we will watch keenly with the press conference there as to what actually comes out of it. It is 19 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Really keen for your feedback on this, if you're a Facebook user or not. Has this gone far enough? What do you make of it? PR or a real step in the right direction? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. After mounting pressure for action, the government is asking the public for their views on the best way to introduce roadside drug testing. It comes after desperate calls this week and last from the families of those killed by drivers under the influence of drugs. But as our political reporter Craig McCulloch reports, it's not a simple fix.
I just want to see justice done.
It was the call which went out last week, a grieving mother pleading for justice. A petition presented at Parliament demanding random roadside drug testing to help save lives.
Every New Zealander deserves to feel safe on the roads.
Today, a development. The Police Minister, Stuart Nash, has released a discussion document asking for feedback on ways to screen and test drivers for drugs.
We need to use technology. We need to give police the tools to go harder on this.
Alongside him in Wellington, the Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter. It's a shift in position for the Green MP, who's previously argued against saliva tests, calling them expensive and intrusive.
Over the past few months, I've been convinced that we can resolve those practical issues.
Are you two in agreement on this policy?
Yeah, very much.
Keeping in mind, it's a discussion document at this point.
And that document does highlight potential problems, namely the limits of current technology. For example, currently devices cannot reliably detect so-called synthetic cannabis or many prescription medications.
You know, we all know with drunk driving, you say your name and address and it can tell if you've got alcohol in your breath. The same technology that does not exist for drug driving, but we're still keen to push forward and make sure that we get it right.
National's Nick Smith has been the opposition's point person when it comes to drug driving, booted out of Parliament last week for barracking on the issue. He didn't respond in time this afternoon, but last week said there should be no barrier to introducing the technology.
Melbourne and the state of Victoria introduced drug testing in 2002. It is true in the first few years there were some difficulties. They have been largely ironed out, evidenced by the fact that it's now in place in both the UK and Canada. We believe it is, the technology is at a state that it is reliable, and we want police to at least have access to that tool.
But Ms Genter says National had the opportunity to introduce testing while it was in power and rejected the idea.
Simon Bridges was Transport Minister for 3 years. Not only did he not do anything about this issue, he actually turned it down. We are doing more than National ever did.
The consultation is to run until June the 28th, with officials to then report back at the end of the year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A drug testing expert believes mass roadside drug testing would keep more impaired drivers off our roads. Last year, 71 people were killed in accidents involving drivers who had used drugs, compared to 66 deaths in crashes where the driver was over the legal alcohol limit. Another 43 people died in crashes where drivers had consumed alcohol but were legal to drive. The government is looking to strengthen our drug driver testing regime and, as you heard, has released that discussion document to canvass views. I asked Kirk Hardy, a former drug squad detective turned CEO of a drug testing agency, how police currently test drivers for drugs.
Currently in New Zealand, what we have is if a police officer suspects that someone is under the influence or impaired by some intoxicating substance, like a drug of some form, then they can actually have an officer come out who is a trained officer in compulsory impairment testing. And they'll come out and they'll do a very simple sobriety type test. I say it's simple, but it's not really that simple. So it's basically an eye assessment. So they'll be looking for nystagmus, which is a bounce of the pupil. They'll be looking at pupil size. They'll be looking for lack of convergence, whether someone can cross their eyes or not. And then they'll ask them to do what's called a walk and turn. You see it sort of in the old cop shows, you walk the straight line, turn around, come back, and then they'll ask them to do a one-legged stand. Now, if that person can't successfully do that, then they will get a medical practitioner in who will then take a blood sample. That blood sample will be sent to a lab and they'll test it for some of the common drugs. And at the moment, some of those might be benzodiazepines, cannabis or methamphetamine.
what more effective testing is available? Because also that impairment test is done if they have good reason to suspect that you may have consumed something or be impaired. They have to have a reason. They can't just randomly test you. So what is available for random testing?
So if you look overseas, and again, a lot of different countries have different methods of how they test. You know, the UK, we're very similar to the UK, the US. Some states adopt saliva testing. Australia, for instance, has been doing saliva testing for over a decade now. But, you know, they test for limited number of drugs. So, you know, it was only last year that New South Wales introduced cocaine to their drug testing panel because it was just ecstasy, methamphetamine and cannabis. So, you know, you're not, with saliva testing, it does have, I guess, its limitations. But again, I guess it's what you're trying to achieve. Now, Australia are very adamant on what they were trying to achieve, and that is it's based on mass screening and it's trace-based program. So they're just looking for any trace of a drug. And you can imagine with our breath testing over here, you have the booze bus, you go past, the officer will get you to count to 10 or state your name, and then you move on. So they wanted something very similar in Australia, and they do around 500,000 roadside drug tests per annum. So they needed something quick, and then if you've got something quick, you obviously sacrifice reliability for speed. So, you know, they've got a process. If you
how reliable, sorry, Kirk, is saliva testing, roadside saliva testing?
Look, it's still got a way to come. It's good in the fact that it acts as a deterrent. But if you look at the stats, you know, you might be getting, you know, a 67% accuracy rate on cannabis on some of those devices. Some of those devices, I think 30% of those, after Official Information Act on Western Australian Police, failed to even work. So it is expensive. But again, I put it to anyone that something is better than nothing. Because if you get a false positive, there is a process in place to retest that sample. So, you know, you'll have a tongue wipe, which is very quick. You know, it has its limitations again. You'll then go on to a saliva-based machine. Again, that has its limitations. And if that gives a positive result, then a further sample is sent to the lab for them to do liquid chromatography mass spectrometry on it, which is, you know, looking, you know, really detailed at that drug to make sure that it is there.
So if you're pulled up on the side of the road, Kirk, how long would it take from woe to go to get that saliva test result in at the side of the road?
For Australia?
Yeah, roundabout. Ballpark.
So if it was a negative, it would probably take, you know, less than 45 seconds. If it showed an indication, then you're probably looking at, you know, up to, you know, 20 minutes to half an hour with all the paperwork, etc. That's before it goes to the lab.
So if you were, as the government is, consulting on what we should do to deter drug drivers, what would you choose as the best regime? What do you think it is? Is what we've got good enough, or do we need something more?
Oh, look, I think you need something more. I think the level of reasonable grounds or suspicion could probably be raised, so you're not having to train so many officers in compulsory impairment testing. 2 weeks, very expensive, and, you know, you don't have those, you don't have that luxury in some small town rural centres. Again, I think if you're looking at mass screening, saliva testing is an option. It's quick, you know, again, you're not going to get into Bill of Rights issues over here with someone sort of...
Yeah,
sorry,
is it enough of a problem that you believe random testing is needed for drug driving in the same way we randomly test for drink driving?
Yeah, I do, because statistically looking, if you were to stop alcohol random testing on the roads, right, I think in 2017 they had 16,000 convictions in New Zealand. Now, you all of a sudden eliminate random roadside testing, you'd have 16,000 drunk drivers on our roads. And you could imagine the carnage and fatalities and injuries that would cause. So I think if doing something is better than nothing, I could say, what cost do you put on a human life? Having families that, have been affected by someone who's been involved in a fatal car accident with someone under the influence of drugs, they live that for a lifetime. I think, roadside drug testing, even at its basic stages, is a step forward rather than a step backwards and doing nothing.
And that's Kirk Hardy, who was a former drug squad detective turned CEO of a drug testing company. The number of confirmed measles cases has climbed to 137 across the country, and its spread has sparked a petition for compulsory vaccination for children. The latest figures were released to Checkpoint today. 51 people have been hospitalised because of the disease so far, and experts say it's been 5 years since the country has seen these kinds of numbers. Our reporter Jessie Chang has more.
Measles has affected regions across New Zealand, with district health boards in Waitemata, Canterbury and the Bay of Plenty hit hardest. Health authorities, including the Institute of Environmental Science and Research, have continuously told the public the best form of protection against the measles is vaccination. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, has even called anti-vaxxer parents pro-plague. But one Wellington woman says there needs to be more action. Louisa Gommans has created a petition to Parliament calling on the government to make it compulsory for all children to be vaccinated, according to the National Immunisation Schedule.
I think this just goes beyond personal choice. I don't want my kids to get sick. Some people may not want their kids to be vaccinated, but at a certain point the government just has to step in and do something about it.
Louisa Gommans says the only exceptions would be if there was a valid medical reason not to vaccinate. France made it compulsory for parents to vaccinate their children against measles and other diseases last year, and New York has made it mandatory in some neighbourhoods to try to stop an outbreak. Ms Gommans is the mother of a 2-year-old boy and a 3-month-old baby. She says they're too young to be fully vaccinated, and she feels helpless being unable to protect them.
It's scary. Every parent wants the best for their children. They want them to be safe and well. And this is one of those things that's out of my hands. The system relies on as many people as possible being vaccinated so that those vulnerable people, little kids, the sick, the elderly and people who can't medically be vaccinated are protected as best they can.
So far, the petition has about 500 signatures. Meanwhile, a Whangarei primary school says there should be a faster system for DHBs to share immunisation information with schools. Hora Hora Primary initially feared that more than half of their students, about 250 of them, were unvaccinated from measles because their parents didn't have records. After 2 weeks of painstaking data matching, Northland DHB staff have been able to confirm that only about 50 children are unvaccinated. The primary's principal, Pat Newman, says every school should be able to quickly data match and find the immunisation history of its students.
The difficulty they've got at the moment is that their records and our records don't talk, so a lot of manual entry has to be done.
Pat Newman says he'll be talking to the DHB to see if the information sharing process can be more automatic. The ESR says there is always a risk that measles brought in from overseas can cause an endemic, which is why vaccination is important. It continues to urge people to have 2 measles, mumps and rubella jabs in order to have the best protection against the disease. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jessie Chang tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, master waka builder and navigator Sir Heck Busby is laid to rest. The alleged war criminal's fill-in job. And after 6, the emergency paramedic who says her colleagues are at breaking point. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program today. We would love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or our email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Here's Susanna now with the headlines.
A technology commentator has criticised Facebook's move to tighten its live streaming rules as just a PR exercise. The social media company says those who break certain rules will be banned from using Facebook Live for a set period of time. Commentator Paul Breslin says it's a token measure and wouldn't have stopped people seeing the video of the Christchurch massacre. Facebook made the announcement shortly before tonight's meeting of world leaders in Paris, which follows a call by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to discuss how to curb online extremism in the wake of the Christchurch terror attacks. Ms Ardern has welcomed Facebook's move, saying it's a good first step to stop the website being used as a tool by terrorists. The government is calling for feedback on methods for screening and testing drivers for drugs, including which substances should be tested for. Last year, 71 people died in crashes where a driver was found to have drugs or medication in their system. The families of those killed by drugged drivers have been calling for random roadside testing, but the Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter, says unlike testing for alcohol, drug testing can test only for the presence of drugs, not whether the driver is impaired. A Wellington woman has started a petition calling on the government to make vaccinations compulsory because of the growing measles outbreak. 137 people around the country have been confirmed as having the disease, with 51 people having to be treated in hospital. Louisa Gomez says the petition is her way of trying to protect her 2 young sons, who aren't old enough to be fully vaccinated against measles. Lawmakers in the US state of Alabama have passed a bill to outlaw abortion outright. The state Senate approved the law by 25 votes to 6 and rejected any exemptions for rape or incest. It will now go for signing to Republican Governor Kay Ivey, who was seen as a strong opponent of abortion. Anti-abortion activists hope it will challenge a landmark 1973 Supreme Court ruling which legalised abortion in the United States. Those are the latest headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. It is about 24 minutes away from 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint with me, Lisa Owen, and Nona Palsier's joined me for business, as you do at this time of the day, Nona. Goodman Property Trust. Okay, so they've opened the books, have they today? Strong profit?
Full year result and very strong profit. Of course, a lot of that was the revaluation gain on their portfolio. I mean, the valuation rose, $201.9 million is a load of, that's a big increase, isn't it? Yeah. And anyways, look, their profit, as a result of that, they rose, nearly 2/3 rather, to $319.5 million. It's a really big increase.
What do they own? I mean, who are they, basically?
Well, they basically own industrial properties. So they used to own a variety of property, but they've sold all that off, and now what they own is Auckland industrial property. They own a very large industrial park called Highbrook. It's almost about 90% developed now, and they have a lot of other properties around the region, mostly in existing and smaller locations. The idea that there'll ever be another industrial park of the size of Highbrook in Auckland is not possible. There just isn't the land available. Loads of demand for industrial property. There's international demand and domestic demand for this type of property, mostly because it has a high yield and it's low maintenance. So from an owner's point of view, it's quite a nice portfolio to have. Certainly it's paying off for Goodman, who's now become the largest listed property entity on the market. So, yeah.
Interesting.
And their share price rose more than 0.25%. That was up 0.5 cent to $1.79 today. And overall, the market rose 0.6%. That was 61 points up to 10,132. Now, we did rise to a record high earlier in the day, but just fell back that little bit at the end. So the record we hit during the day was 10,172. That's quite high. The dollar is trading a little bit lower today against the U.S. only at 65.6 U.S. cents. And that's partly because the Australian dollar has been dragged down by some negative Chinese economic data. So it was at 69.5 U.S. cents. That's a 4-month low for the Australian. We were against the Aussie. We were at 94.7. And 50.8 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Palsier with your business news. A long-time advocate for breast cancer patients has died as Pharmac's Drug Advisory Panel again delays its decision on funding life-prolonging cancer treatments. Marlborough mother Emily Stein, who was 32, died at home on Friday, a victim of the most commonly diagnosed cancer among women in New Zealand. Her fellow stage 4 patients are calling for the government to double Pharmac's funding in the upcoming budget and again demanding more transparency around its decisions. Alex Perrottet has more.
Emily Stein was at Parliament last October, delivering a petition for the funding of Kadcyla, generically known as TDM1, which international experts say gives terminal breast cancer patients vital months and even years, and a decent quality of life as well. Without funding, it costs $10,000 every 3 weeks. Libby Burgess, the chair of Breast Cancer Aotearoa Coalition, says Emily needed the drug because her children needed her.
She wanted her kids to remember her when they grew up, but she's lost her battle, and she's someone who did need TDM1 as a later line strategy, but she did not have access and she had a short lifespan, and many people are feeling her loss deeply.
Late last year, Pharmac promised that its advisory committee would consider breast cancer drugs Kadcyla as well as Ibrance or palbociclib at its February meeting. It's just released the minutes of that meeting, and in 44 pages there's one paragraph on Ibrance referring a discussion to a future meeting. But there's a page and a half considering a drug to be used in hospital tests for erectile dysfunction. Pharmac sent a statement today promising to look at Ibrance at another meeting later this month. But patients say that's not good enough, and Libby Burgess agrees.
It's just shocking, and it does really seem that cancer patients are being disadvantaged. It is inhumane for us as New Zealanders to be withholding treatments from cancer patients while we're improving the quality of life for people with erectile dysfunction. For instance, it's something that should be treated, but where does that stand in relation to giving a woman more time for her kids to grow up so that they will remember her?
Sue Wall-Cade has stage 4 cancer and is part of the group Metavivors that have petitioned Parliament to fund the drugs. She says Pharmac has not made it clear why it disagrees with international experts on the effectiveness of the drugs.
It's the same old rhetoric that more evidence is required, and yet the evidence is there. It has been supplied by the clinical experts, and there's just a lot of frustration and just totally don't understand why they are taking this stance.
She says a decision to fund the drugs would be made easier if Finance Minister Grant Robertson gave Pharmac more money in the upcoming budget. She's sending him this message.
You need to at least double the budget for Pharmac for spending on modern medicines, and that would then lift New Zealand into a position with the OECD countries where we should be.
Ms Wall-Cade says she doesn't need the drugs yet, but when she does, she'll have to look to a Give a Little page, draw down her KiwiSaver or downgrade her home to fork out the massive bill. Tracy Barr-Smith is another stage 4 patient and says she's trying not to hold her breath but can't help but be apprehensive.
They keep on passing it back and forth between committees, and so we kind of feel like a hamster on a wheel. We're just constantly in a spinning mode, going around and around in circles, and it's exhausting. You've got people that are just on the edge of their seat praying that these drugs get approval.
Pharmac announced late last month that it would overhaul its decision-making process around the funding of drugs and be more transparent. But this week, no spokesperson has been available to talk to us, and Ms Barr-Smith says Pharmac can't say the drugs are too expensive if it hasn't even started negotiating a price.
And that's where it's really frustrating, because they keep on saying that the financial cost is such a barrier to them being able to purchase these drugs. But we're like, but you haven't even negotiated, so you don't even know what the cost is going to be.
And in the meantime, Libby Burgess says more women will die prematurely, all the while putting up with empty phrases from Pharmac.
They've got these little catchphrases that doesn't do what it says on the tin, and Pharmac has a model that the world envies. That is just dark PR, actually.
The medical director of the Cancer Society, Dr. Chris Jackson, says despite the vow to be more open, nothing has changed with Pharmac.
We've seen this time and time and time again. We only need to think back to Keytruda with melanoma a couple of years ago. It was the same issue. We had no fixed time for decisions. We've had the same issue with lung cancer, with bowel cancer drugs, and now with breast cancer drugs. So it's the same thing every single time. No fixed time frame, no clear decision criteria. The goalposts seem to move, and the patients are the ones left in the dark.
Mr. Jackson says the patients have mounted a strong case to the government.
They see the gap between New Zealand and other countries like Canada, UK and Australia, And they say quite rightly, why is New Zealand not doing as well as those other countries who we compare ourselves to? So what's behind those petitions is that people affected by those cancers are saying loud and clear that they don't have world-class care, and they're right, they don't.
The government copped flack last year when it announced Pharmac would save $200 million over 4 years thanks to new modelling. This time around, Grant Robertson is promising a well-being budget. All the while, these cancer patients say they just want a small slice of well-being for the limited days they have left. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Master waka builder and navigator Sir Hikanuku Mai Busby has been laid to rest in the far north. Thousands have attended the 86-year-old's tangihanga, and his final service was held today at his marae Pukipotu just outside of Kaitaia. Mani Dunlop was there.
The sound of the pūtatara and the voices of Kaihui followed Sir Hikanuku Mai Busby out of Te Riohina Marae on the shoulders of his whānau. Those who spoke at the service included his son, long-serving student and friend Stan Conrad, and his Hawaiian comrade Nainoa Thompson. Stan Conrad thanked his mentor for everything he had given him, but also used the opportunity to poke fun at his use of words, which had everyone laughing.
He finished school at 4-4, and he never had this list of beautiful pākehā, reo, but he'll have a go at it. So I could rattle off a few things he would say, like apparently. He'll use apparently in just about everything. The other thing that he'll use also is that's buggered. That's buggered.
A lot of the kōrero over the past few days has been about the legacy he leaves behind in celestial navigation and waka building, and a lot of the unfinished mahi he wants completed. The chair of the Marae Committee, Honi Matthews, says he was a practical man who also left a long list for the marae. He says very recently they managed to tick off the list, revitalising the maihi and amo, the carvings on the wharenui, which Sir Hek carved many years ago, just in time for his tangi.
This was being one of the many jobs on our list that he's set for us to do. And just being 2 weeks ago, it was a moving moment for all of us as the whānau who were here with him at that time. And now he's brought us here on this big test for the whole country, all to come and give thanks for what they've received from him.
Nainoa Thompson, a lead voyager from Hawaii and good friend to Sir Hek, travelled to the funeral to thank the man he says was like a father to him. In his kōrero at the tangi, he said they had named a star after Sir Hikanuku Mai.
It's a very special star. It's in the tip of the fishhook of Kamakau Nui on Maui, the great fishhook that Maui used to pull the islands out of the sea to give us life as Polynesians. And it's the fitting star that he's the great navigator. He's pulling islands out of the sea. He's the bridge builder. He's connecting us, and it's at the heart of the essence of who we are as a planetary system and people of the cosmos.
Nainoa Thompson says the star never sets in Aotearoa, so he will be with his people forever. Sir Hikanuku Mai was buried next to his late wife Hilda Busby at his cemetery Rangihaukaha, up the hill across the road to the marae. I te rangatira, moi mai rā. In Kaitaia for Checkpoint, ko Mani Dunlop TNA.
And it is about 12 minutes away from 6. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Where does an alleged war criminal accused of torture and directing mass executions look for work while living in the United States? For Yusuf Abdi Ali, there was an easy answer: the rideshare services Uber and Lyft. CNN's Drew Griffin has the story.
Yusuf Abdi Ali is an accused war criminal, facing a civil trial in Virginia, alleging he's responsible for atrocities including torture and attempted murder in Somalia in the 1980s. While awaiting trial, he has been driving for Uber.
Wally? Yes, sir. He's just coming now.
Undercover CNN producers last week ordered an Uber in Northern Virginia. Yusuf, listed on the app as an Uber Pro Diamond driver with a 4.89 rating, picked them up. Yusuf Ali also told us he drives for Lyft.
Where are you from? Originally from Somalia.
Sir, I was surprised to see that you drive for Uber and Lyft. Did the background checks of those companies not reveal the fact that you are accused of torture and murder and about to face a trial here for basically terrorizing communities?
Just how Uber and Lyft missed the accusations exposes a potential hole in their screening processes. A simple Google search of Ali's name brings up article after article about his alleged brutality as a commander in the Somalian security force. A major expose by CNN in 2016 found the alleged war criminal
CNN, okay.
working as a security guard at Dulles International Airport, a job he was fired from shortly after the report aired. And a search would have also revealed this, a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation documentary with villagers telling terrifying stories of Yusuf Ali's actions, the man they knew as Colonel Touquet.
2 men were caught, tied to a tree. Oil was poured on them, and they were burned alive. I saw it with my own eyes.
He caught my brother. He tied him to a military vehicle and dragged him behind. He said to us, "If you've got enough power, get him back." He shredded him into pieces. That's how he died.
Farhan Warfa is a Somalian who claims in 1988 Ali tortured him for months, then shot him twice and ordered guards to bury him alive. He survived, and since no international court has jurisdiction, Warfa has turned to civil court in the U.S. to seek damages. In court filings, Ali acknowledges he was a colonel in the Somali National Army, but denies having attempted extrajudicial killing and torture and denies directing any such actions by his subordinates.
That's what the money is.
Ali told us he's been an Uber driver for a year and a half, and that background check, he said, was easy.
If you apply tonight, maybe after two days it will come up.
Last year, Uber tightened its background checks after CNN found convicted felons were able to become rideshare drivers. Both Uber and Lyft say their background checks include criminal offenses and driving incidents. And the company that does the screening, Checker, tells CNN in a statement that they rely on public criminal records that have been adjudicated in a court of law rather than unverified sources like Google search results. Ali has never been convicted of a crime, only accused.
Mr. Ali, I have to give you the opportunity to respond to all the allegations. You may not wish to respond to all the allegations, but the allegations are that basically you tortured people, murdered people. Both Uber and Lyft say they don't review social media or conduct online searches as part of those background checks on drivers. But when we pointed out Ali's history through a simple Google search, both companies took immediate action to remove him. Lyft banned him altogether for life. Uber has suspended him pending a review. That trial expected to wrap up this week in Virginia.
And that's Drew Griffin reporting there. It's about 8 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback, you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Otago Regional Council is backing a controversial measure which will allow Ngāi Tahu to handpick 2 candidates to sit on the council's policy committee. The proposal passed at today's council meeting, but not without incident, sparking a heated and at times fractious debate amongst councillors. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown was at the meeting and filed this report.
We've had dozens of people, mostly North Islanders, I note, who probably don't even know where the Dunstan constituency is, and who think that Cromwell was a bloke who monstered the Irish some centuries ago. They've been dog whistled in and have showered us with words like undemocratic. We've been called privileged, racist, unethical, left-leaning PC control freaks, and we've been described as exercising obnoxious racism.
That's Councillor Michael Deaker describing the torrent of emails Otago Regional councillors have received since fellow councillor Michael Laws publicly blasted a proposal to include 2 iwi members representing Ngāi Tahu's 4 Otago Runanga on the council's policy committee. The representatives will be chosen by iwi and paid at 20% of a councillor's salary. Councillor Laws says the measure is worse than racist and calls into question the fundamental principles of democracy in Otago.
18 months ago, you rejected Maori wards, every one of you around this table. And you said one of the reasons was you can't have racial preference. No, we can't do that. We haven't consulted on it. Bang! We're going to have two iwi representatives on Policy Council and they're going to have voting and rights and we're going to pay them. There's no logical consistency there.
And Mr Laws wasn't alone in his opposition. Councillors Graham Bell and Sam Neill also rejected the measure, while Ella Lawton was circumspect in her support.
This is a challenging one for me because I really believe in the need for a close partnership and to continue to develop what that means, but also the process has been terrible. Again, Councillor Scott, you say it's a good way to fast track the process. We don't know that. We haven't actually had a conversation. Sorry, I'm speaking.
In his criticism of opponents of the measure, Councillor Deaker took firm aim at Councillor Laws.
There are parts of me that say, good on you, Councillor Laws, because the Dunstan constituency is clearly going to be a knife-edge exercise in this coming election. And he's a very effective populist politician in a sort of a Trumpian way.
The measure passed with the support of 7 councillors, including Ella Lawton. Outside the meeting, Chairman Stephen Woodhead addressed the divisive nature of the debate.
We understand we've all signed an oath and we're here for the benefit of the wider region, and we need to abide by the group decision, the council decision in this case, and B, it's just part of a robust political process. As part of the process as a councillor, you just get on with it, move on, accept the group decision, and we move on as an organisation.
But Councillor Laws wasn't looking to build any bridges in his assessment of his colleague's decision.
I guess there's a good element of political correctness in the sense of we want to be seen to be doing the right thing. And so their sentiments or their hearts are in the right place, it's just their heads are in the toilet.
And while the vote will allow Ngāi Tahu to choose 2 members to sit on the policy committee, it will only remain in effect for the rest of this triennium, meaning incoming councillors will have a chance to debate the matter again after October's elections. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Residents in a rural Canterbury town are angry and shocked after at least 40 cemetery plaques were stolen, desecrated and sold to a scrap metal dealer. The bronze plaques vanished from graves at Springston Cemetery after Anzac Day and were reported missing by a council worker last week. In what the military community is describing as a low blow, most of those taken were dedicated to servicemen and women in the RSA section. Katie Todd reports.
Lincoln resident Bruce Tweedy could hardly believe his ears last week when his brother rang to say the plaque on their parents' grave was gone.
When I went down and saw the damage, I was angry, I suppose would be the word. Very angry. Just thought, well, how could anyone be so low to do something like this to return servicemen and women who fought for our country? Anger would be the main word.
He's one of dozens of locals left reeling by the thefts, which saw 37 plaques taken from graves in the RSA section and at least 3 from other parts of the small township cemetery. Canterbury District RSA President Stan Hansen is also frustrated and upset.
The military community, which includes RSA members obviously, right throughout have been shocked, disheartened, very, very thoughtful for the families of the deceased, and of course they are very, very angry. This is one of those crimes that has gone way over the line. You don't do this.
On Monday, the police received a tip-off that about 17 of the bronze plaques had been sold to a scrap metal plant in Christchurch, with any written details scratched off or ground down. For Mr Hansen, that was more bad news.
All the information, the names, the date of birth, death, etc. have been ground off, so they've desecrated the memory as well. That's another form of low, and we're very disappointed with that.
While the police investigate, Selwyn District Mayor Sam Broughton says the council is working to help families where possible. There's already plans to replace the plaques in the next few weeks.
It's very upsetting for the families that are involved, and as a council we want to make sure we are supportive and can make it right. We will be replacing them. They might not look exactly the same, obviously. It's very difficult to do that, but we're working with an engraver at the moment and Veterans Affairs to make sure that they can be put back in and look like they should in the cemetery.
But those replacing the plaques aren't unfamiliar with the task. Deputy Head of Veterans Affairs, Marty Eller, says having standardised bronze veterans plaques means thefts happen from time to time, as people expect to be able to melt down the metal and sell it.
such a disrespectful thing, and it's particularly distressing for families that, you know, people have actually targeted these particular bronze plaques. So, we've had other examples, perhaps once a year.
Ms. Ella says people need to understand it's completely pointless to sell the plaques, as scrap dealers are on alert to spot them.
Actually, they're really hard to dispose of, and we think people don't know that. So the main thing for us is just that people do understand that this is both distressing to families and completely pointless from the point of view of them making any money out of it.
And because of this, Marty Ella says the people responsible are often caught by the police. A spokesperson for the police says their investigations are continuing. Bruce Tweedy says he's hopeful there will be arrests over the thefts, so whoever took his parents' plaque can be held accountable. For Checkpoint, Katie Todd.
We are just a few pips away from the 6 o'clock news, and Susanna is standing by. We'll be back after the bulletin with more on the drug testing issue.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. The Prime Minister says Facebook's attempts to put limits on its live streaming service for those who break certain rules in response to the Christchurch terror attacks is a good first step. Overnight, world leaders will meet in Paris following a call by Jacinda Ardern to discuss online violence. Catherine Hutton reports.
Facebook has announced that people who break certain rules, such as sharing a link to a statement from a terrorist group without context, will be stopped from using Facebook Live for a set period of time. It is also investing $7.5 million into research to improve video analysis technology. Tech commentators say the amount is paltry for a company that made a $7 billion profit in the last quarter of 2018. The founder of Gorilla Technology, Paul Spain, says no one has the technology to lock down certain content from being displayed. Another commentator, Paul Brislin, says the changes wouldn't have stopped what happened in Christchurch and is a PR exercise by Facebook before the Paris summit. This is Catherine Hutton.
The Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter, says any enhanced drug driver testing system must be grounded in evidence and best practice. The government has released a public consultation document on random roadside testing as it considers whether to introduce a tougher regime. The National Party and families of those killed by drugged drivers have been calling for random roadside testing. Ms Genter says unlike testing for alcohol, drug testing can only test for the presence of drugs, not whether the driver is impaired.
This discussion document outlines some of the issues we're hoping to hear from experts and the public, because there still are some practical challenges with saliva testing.
Julianne Genter, a Green MP and the Associate Transport Minister. A Wellington woman has started a petition calling on the government to make vaccinations for children compulsory. Updated figures show there have now been 137 confirmed cases of measles across the country since January, and 51 people have been hospitalised. Louisa Gomans is a mother of 2 young boys who aren't yet old enough to be fully vaccinated. She says the petition is her way of trying to protect them.
Every parent wants the best for their children. They want them to be safe and well. And this is one of those things that's out of my hands. The system relies on as many people as possible being vaccinated so that those vulnerable people, little kids, the sick, the elderly and people who can't medically be vaccinated are protected as best they can.
Louisa Goman says all vaccinations on the national immunisation schedule should be made mandatory for children unless there's an except where there is a valid medical reason to opt out. The jury in the trial of a former teacher charged with indecently touching boys has been unable to reach a verdict and will return tomorrow. Benjamin Swan has pleaded not guilty to 11 charges of an indecent act on a young person and has been on trial for 2 weeks in the High Court in Auckland. The jury retired on Monday and has been unable to decide a verdict after 14 hours of deliberation spread over the last 3 days. They will return at 10 tomorrow morning. The master waka builder and navigator Sir Heke Nukumai Busby has been laid to rest in the far north. Thousands have attended the 86-year-old tangihanga, and the first final service was held today at his marae in Pukepoto, just outside Kaitaia. One of those who travelled there was Nainoa Thompson, an expert navigator from Hawaii and close friend of Sir Heke's. He spoke at today's funeral and said Sir Heke was a man who dedicated his life to waka navigation.
He's a man of extraordinary faith, that he has his very strong beliefs and he fiercely fights for them. And so so when I say he's a teacher, he's all those kinds of things. More than just a canoe builder or the navigator. It's really a mentor.
Nainoa Thompson says he's named a star after Sir Heke Nukumai in his memory. Sir Heke was buried at Rangihaukaha Marae next to his late wife, Hilda Busby. The Education Ministry has applied to the Employment Relations Authority for mediated bargaining of its pay talks with the teacher unions. The Ministry had hoped to make a joint application to the authority with the Educational Institute and the Post-Primary Teachers Association, but neither union met its deadline by 3 p.m. today. The Ministry is hoping to avert a joint strike by primary and secondary teachers at the end of this month. Power is still out in Papua New Guinea's East New Britain province after last night's magnitude 7.5 earthquake. The shallow quake hit about 50 kilometres offshore from Rambole, triggering violent shaking and widespread panic. PNG Power says electricity has not yet been restored to the East New Britain grid. The company says 2 power stations have suffered minor damage and will need to be repaired. It's 6:05. The Black Caps' new batting coach Peter Fulton is confident he has the experience to assist at the top level. The former international batsman will take over from Craig McMillan after the World Cup. Fulton has been working primarily with the New Zealand under-19 team in recent years, although he has some involvement with the Black Caps at training camps.
And I wouldn't have applied if I didn't think I was, so it's obviously a step up, but it's an exciting challenge, and like I said, I'm keen to get stuck into it and get the opportunity to work with some really talented players.
The Black Caps head to the World Cup on Sunday. The Hurricanes have left out Beauden Barrett for a second and final All Black enforced rest for Friday night's Super Rugby match against the Argentinian side, the Jaguars in Wellington. James Marshall will start at first 5 in his place. Meanwhile, Israel Folau appears to be preparing for a future without rugby, changing her social media profiles as a decision looms on the Wallaby Stars' future. Folau's Instagram and Twitter accounts no longer feature him playing for the New South Wales Waratahs, but instead show a graphic of the number 1 made up of the word God and the words God First. An independent panel is considering whether to terminate Folau's 4-year, $4 million Rugby Australia contract after he was found guilty of a high-level breach due to his controversial social media posts. The Nelson cyclist George Bennett remains 10th overall after the 3rd stage of the Tour of California. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Brian Crump is having the night off, so it'll be me, Melody Thomas, keeping you company. For New Zealand Music Month, Christchurch singer-songwriter Monique Aiken plays some songs for the Sofa Session. Our window on the world looks at the rise of so-called populism behind the former Iron Curtain. And we kick off a new drama series, Words of Love, written by the award-winning actor and writer Fiona Samuel. That's Nights with me, Melody Thomas, tonight from 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine spells, a few showers clearing south of Waikato tomorrow morning. Rain tomorrow night for Manawatu. Gisborne through to Wairarapa, mostly fine. Rain late tomorrow south of Hastings, briefly heavy. Westerly gales in the south. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine with west to nor'westerly gales in exposed places, severe about parts of the Canterbury High Country. Showers later tomorrow, possibly heavy about the east coast with a strong southerly change. For Bulla and Westland, rain or showers possibly heavy this afternoon, becoming fine later tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, showers, some heavy easing tomorrow afternoon. Westerly gales, severe in exposed places. Chatham Islands, showers clearing this afternoon but returning overnight. Some possibly heavy with thunderstorms. It's 8 minutes past 6. You're with RNZ National. Indira Stewart back at 5 a.m. tomorrow on First Up.
Thanks, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Associate Transport Minister Julianne Genter says she'd personally be comfortable with random roadside saliva testing for drug drivers, but the efficiency and accuracy of those tests need to be assessed. At the moment, police can conduct an impairment test if they have reason to believe the driver is on drugs. That includes examining their eyes and testing their balance. Failure can mean a blood test follows. The government is looking to beef that up and today released a discussion document on the issue. I spoke to Julianne Genter and asked her how effective the current drug driver testing is.
the regime that we're going to have, including the penalties and whether it's zero tolerance or not, are the issues that we're teasing out during the consultation. It's also the case that a significant number of people who are found with drugs in their system have taken legal prescription drugs, but it is illegal to drive under impairment. And about 25% of commonly prescribed drugs, it's advised not to drive after taking them.
The discussion document says that the current law makes it hard for the police to carry out higher numbers of tests that could act as a deterrent for drug driving. What's wrong with the current law? Why does that stop us presently doing more drug driving tests?
I think that it is the case that we could be doing more alcohol enforcement, and that's certainly something that I would like to see. And as part of that, you would pick up other types of impairment. And then I suppose what this discussion document is looking to establish is where public opinion sits on how we could have an effective and fair regime that makes use of the technology that is available with saliva testing to ensure that we have greater deterrence of drug driving.
So where do you sit on this? What do you think is reasonable? Is it okay to take a sample out of someone's mouth if you don't have probable cause? Would you feel comfortable with that, or does it cross a line?
I've always said that no one should be impaired, whether by alcohol, medication, or recreational drugs, if they're going to be behind the wheel. It is a very serious undertaking to be driving a motor vehicle, and you can pose a significant risk to yourself and others if you're impaired. And that's one of the reasons why I think we need to look at how we can give police more tools, like saliva testing, to help enforce our drug driving laws that already exist.
But would you be comfortable with that? Because you've raised some issues about saliva testing before, the cost being one of them, and also a whole bunch of people would have a test carried out on them that regardless of whether they show signs of being impaired or not. And I know that does happen with drink driving, but this isn't a more invasive test, isn't it? So would you be comfortable with it?
Look, the purpose of this consultation is to ensure that the public and experts are weighing up the different trade-offs.
But you're a member of the public too, as well as being a minister. You're a member of the public too. So I'm just wanting to see where you are sitting with this at the moment, you personally.
Me personally, I think that it's not acceptable to be driving impaired, and that drivers should expect that if they are driving impaired that they may be pulled over, they may be screened, and they may be prosecuted, which is currently the case.
Screened with saliva testing though? You comfortable with that?
At the moment, if there's probable cause and you fail an impairment test, then you're screened with a follow-up blood test.
I'm talking about random saliva testing. Random saliva testing.
Yeah,
would you be comfortable with that?
Personally, I would be perfectly comfortable with it, but I think that we do need to weigh up the different practical issues to ensure that we strike the right balance, that we have an incredibly effective regime that isn't unduly taking up the time or resulting in false positives for people who are not impaired.
So obviously we've got a referendum on legalising cannabis coming up at the next election. Does it make it, more urgent to get this sorted, and what is the time frame?
The time frame for this is we have a discussion document out for consultation for 6 weeks. We're expecting the feedback from that to feed into the development of options for any policy or legislative changes by the end of the year, and for those to be presented or introduced, if there are any, early next year. And I do think that with the referendum coming up, there is an opportunity to ensure that we're regulating effectively, and that can help us deter dangerous behaviour that's related to drug use.
Do you think there should be any tolerance, if we were to vote to legalise cannabis, do you think there should be any tolerance for cannabis use for people behind the wheel, or should it be zero tolerance?
I'll listen to the evidence on that, and I know that other jurisdictions have adopted different approaches. So some have zero tolerance, and some have an infringement regime that's more akin to our drink driving regime, where...
What's your thinking now? What's your thinking at the moment?
I will absolutely be directed by the evidence of the best way to reduce offending and reduce impaired driving on our roads. That's my priority.
So speaking of evidence, and I know this is, it's an issue of contention with a lot of people. I'm wanting, hopefully you can clear it up for us. So drug driving versus drink driving, which causes the most fatalities?
I don't think we have the data that can definitively say what it is. If you look at the comparable figures of drivers who were involved in a fatality who were tested afterwards, there were more that had the presence of alcohol than had the presence of anything that we would describe as drugs.
And that's Associate Transport Minister Julianne Genter. And in case you were wondering, there was a little bit of chattering going on in the background. That was the Minister's baby son. We've had some feedback from you all about the drug driving issue. Mandy says, I'm interested. How will they test cannabis use? That can stay in your system for months, depending on your size and how often you use. It doesn't mean you are under the influence at the time. And this texter says, I agree about drug testing drivers, but what about cracking down on drivers using phones? It is absolutely rife, and I am sure it's contributing to our increasing road toll. Other countries take a much tougher line, for example, Australia. Ask Mr Nash, why not New Zealand? And James in Christchurch says, comparing figures for drivers over the alcohol limit with those who had used drugs is not comparing apples with apples. Were those who had used drugs impaired? If you are not going to compare apples with apples, then you need to tell listeners this. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. Text in on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. An emergency paramedic in Hamilton says her colleagues are at breaking point and the city is so under-resourced it could never manage an event like Christchurch's terror attacks. Laurie Gomans is one of many ambulance paramedics saying they're overworked and underpaid and have been locked in an ongoing pay dispute with St John Ambulance. St John Ambulance says it's negotiating in good faith on pay, but it boils down to funding and it has asked the government for an increase. Now, the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, has indicated there could be a funding announcement for St John in the budget later this month. But it's not just pay that's in dispute, with paramedics saying at times there is just one ambulance crew left in Hamilton at night. St John has promised to provide 2 people to each ambulance crew to make it safer at night, but medics say that is still not the case in Huntly and Ngaruawahia, and it's dangerous. Laurie Gomans spoke with our reporter Alex Perrottet.
When you think about Hamilton, it's got a big population. During the day, there's 4 ambulances, and at night, there's 3. But at night, the 3 ambulances that are covering Hamilton are also covering Raglan. You've also got Morrinsville, who's also covering Te Araha. You've got 1 ambulance in Matamata, 1 in Cambridge, 1 in Te Awamutu, 1 in Ngaruawahia, 1 in Huntly. The 1 in Ngaruawahia and the 1 in Huntly are still single crewed at night. They are on the projected forecast to get double crewing, but that has not happened yet.
Have you been given a timeline when Ngaruawahia and Huntly will have double crewing?
I think Huntly is sometime this year, and I think Ngaruawahia is sometime next year, but they're proposed dates.
So no strong promises?
Negative.
And you look after that area sometimes?
Yep, because we have to go help them because they need further resources. They need, further skills. They need someone to drive for them. So it's quite frequent that we have to go and help them.
And does that mean that at times you can't actually attend an event because you're just not protected? You don't. It's not safe enough.
No. So basically, it puts us in a situation where, we're busy doing call-outs and going to all these call-outs, and there's no cover in Hamilton because we're all either on jobs or committed to jobs or helping other crews with their patients, that there's no cover. There could be no cover in Morrinsville for a long time, no cover anywhere in Hamilton. But they try and get the resources from elsewhere, but it doesn't actually fix the fact that we've got a large area that we have to cover considering we have very few resources. So it can come down to the fact that we have purple call-outs. So purple call-outs require an advanced paramedic and another crew and the fire brigade. So that takes out 2 of our resources. So I've worked a night shift recently and we had to go to Raglan in the boondocks, and it took 2 vehicles out of Hamilton to go to this, as well as the fire brigade from Raglan and it left Hamilton with one ambulance to cover the entire area for about 2 hours.
And what sort of risk do you see with that, with, I guess, a big event happening in Hamilton at the same time?
Oh, it's massive. We never know what's going to happen these days. Unfortunately, our road toll, in the Waikato in particular, is horrific. We could be needed at one place, and then 10 minutes later, we needed it in another direction. So you're just jumping around from job to job to job to job.
And what about personnel? Have you been promised that there'll be more people put on?
Well, no. Well, at the moment, we're struggling to cover shifts. You know, people are tired, they're burnt out, they're exhausted, and we're just struggling to cover the shifts and the trucks on the road at the moment. But we're begging for more resources in Hamilton. We've been under-resourced for a long, long time, and we're buggered. We're at breaking point.
Do you think in this condition that you guys are in, that you'll be able to handle some big event if it happens, say something like Christchurch? Let's hope it doesn't ever happen again, but if something like that was to happen, how do you feel about the resources you've got there?
We would struggle, absolutely struggle. We would obviously do our absolute best, but we would struggle with the current capacity of ambulances to our resources and our area, and where that all have to come from, it would take time. Christchurch had enough ambulances to deal with their situation and save a lot of lives. I don't know if that would be the same in Hamilton.
Why is Hamilton neglected so much?
That is a good question. I have no idea.
What's the most pressing thing? What do you need the most?
We need more money. So the short answer, we need money to pay us better. We need money to get more ambulances, to get more staff. It's a flow-on effect.
And that's Hamilton paramedic Laurie Gomans talking to Alex Perrottet. And Stu Coburn, St John District Operations Manager, has sent a statement saying additional ambulance staff will be employed to double crew the Huntly and Ngaruawahia ambulances as scheduled within the next 10 months. And regarding resourcing in Hamilton, he says response times in Hamilton over the last 12 months have remained constant and are in line with response times throughout the country. It is 21 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Families of children who have been taken by the state without notice say there isn't enough mental health support and advocacy available. It follows the uplift of a baby from a 19-year-old which saw Hawke's Bay Hospital go into lockdown last week. The organiser of a hui for aggrieved families says she is broken-hearted by the stories and has formed the organisation Whānau First to fight for better wraparound services. Mediana Johnson reports.
The Hawke's Bay case has brought back terrible memories for one woman who has previously had children taken by the state. The uplifts of her children were almost always straight from the hospital.
Words can't describe. I still haven't gotten over the damage that I've been through child youth and family. Even now, it's painful. No one can ever accept that or get over it or deal with that. It's an ongoing pain that will always be there.
She hasn't had contact with Oranga Tamariki for over 5 years, but now, pregnant again, she lives in fear that her new baby will also be taken from her. For this reason, she doesn't want her name used or her case brought to the attention of Oranga Tamariki.
I'm buying stuff not knowing if it'll ever get used, not knowing if I'm wasting money, not knowing what will happen. I'm stressed and anxious. There's no other words to describe it. I stress about it every day.
The ministry is not able to comment on her specific case without a privacy waiver. Although a Pākehā woman herself, she feels she was targeted because all 5 of her children are Māori. 172 Māori babies were taken by the state last year, according to ministry figures, up from 110 in 2015. RNZ has requested the number of children that have been uplifted by Oranga Tamariki without notice in the last 3 years. Lou Hutchinson, who has a background in suicide prevention, has formed the organisation Whānau First after hearing from families of uplifted children at the hui in Ragland. She says that there needs to be more mental health support available to the wider whānau.
We can't go through an uplift process or a removal process of children by Oranga Tamariki and not have any wraparound services for those people left behind. And that's not just parents, that's also brothers and sisters or nieces and nephews. It is having a devastating effect.
Ms Hutchinson wants to meet the Health Minister to discuss the psychological needs of families with uplifted children, many of who, she says, are left suicidal. Whānau First is made up of parents and family members who've had children go through the system, but have since been brought back into their care and want to advocate for others to do the same. They feel there needs to be more advocacy available to family.
When they're dealing with OT, a lot of them tend to be alone when they're in their meetings, and that just further puts them at risk. Like, they don't know how the system works, and it's very coordinated. We just definitely need people advocating, even in the family court.
In a statement, Oranga Tamariki's Glynis Sandlin says that it is the statutory duty of the ministry to protect children, and that uplifting a child is often the last resort. It must satisfy the family court that the harm or risk of harm requires the child to be removed, and that there are no safe alternatives available. She says every decision it deals with is complex, and children in care often come from a background involving exposure to family violence, drug abuse, sexual and physical abuse, and chronic neglect. It says 65% of its caregivers are whānau members, looking after their own. Oranga Tamariki Chief Executive Gráinne Moss said last week that legislative changes will be introduced in July to reduce the number of Māori babies taken from their whānau. Meanwhile, the Chief Ombudsman Peter Bosher is investigating whether any action should be taken over the handling of the Hawke's Bay uplift. For Checkpoint, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
Auckland has been ranked 7th on a list of the best cities in the world to cycle. The 2019 Bicycle Cities Index was released this morning by Berlin insurance company Koya, and it's a dream come true for Auckland cycling advocates who were not expecting the result. Brooke Jenner reports.
The report ranks 90 cities on a range of cycling factors, including weather, infrastructure, investment, usage, crime and safety. Utrecht in the Netherlands took out first place with the highest bicycle usage rate overall, at over 50%. Sitting in 7th place is Auckland, beating Melbourne, Berlin and Tokyo. An Auckland Transport spokesperson, Hamish Bunn, says it's a massive feat for the city to be ranked amongst the best in the world. He says many of them are cities Auckland looks up to as examples of success.
You know, of course, the classics such as Amsterdam, the Netherlands, those sorts of cities, always understanding what's going on. London at the moment, I understand, extremely crowded cycleways and huge success over there.
Mr Bunn says there's been a strong focus to develop Auckland as a cycling city.
Certainly we're up and coming. That's absolutely the intention. We're doing a lot of work to improve our cycling network, improve the safety of our cycling network, get the comms out there for people to understand, hey, cycling is an option. There are plenty of great recreational cycling routes and plenty of great commuting cycling routes into town.
A Bike Auckland spokesperson, Barb Cuthbert, says she's not surprised to hear the city is placed higher than Melbourne.
Australians come here now specifically because our cycling is way better than across Australian cities because we're spending money on it, and they are not. So that's a huge factor.
She says e-bikes and building infrastructure connecting the city have transformed its cycling scene. But she doesn't think we're in the same league as the likes of Copenhagen.
We're doing some fabulous projects, but it's just way too slow. If you think about it, 7.5 kilometres from Glen Innes to Tamaki, people are so hungry for that from the eastern part of the city, but it just makes me weep because it's so slow.
On Auckland's iconic pink bike path, long-time cyclist Glenn Elliott was undecided on whether Auckland deserved the spot.
In terms of Auckland ranking 7th as a cycling-friendly city, I would say the jury is still out on that. However, great progress over the last 5 years.
Emma Wallace, who's recently taken up cycling, says there's definite room for bike safety improvement.
The cycle paths are awesome, but when I'm on the road, I have to say it can feel slightly scary. and that's kind of a reason why I wouldn't let my kids do it right now.
The city's next cycleway projects will connect the centre city with Westgate and out south to Papakura. Bike Auckland's Barb Cuthbert says as more projects are completed, the city will well and truly deserve its world-class ranking. I Tamaki Makaurau o te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Brooke Jenner tēnei.
Let's get to your feedback now on the issue of live streaming. This is Facebook announcing today that it's introducing a first strike policy. You do something bad, you won't get access to live streaming for a certain period of time. This person says social and personal responsibility in reporting objectionable online material to tech companies, ? Talk about David and Goliath. That's why tech companies are in such a strong position. Users don't want to report because they have a seemingly unbreakable vested interest. Who wants to risk losing what they use? And this texter says, what's to stop people making another account? Valid point. Under a fake name and email, there should be a delay in live streaming and or a licence or permit should be required. On the subject of drug testing drivers, this person says, only heard the tail end of this, but it would be better to test impairment, which would include people who are dangerously fatigued rather than penalising people who smoked a joint 3 days ago and is safe to drive. Sean says drug testing companies are the modern snake oil salesman. Thank you for your company this evening. Don't forget to check out our stories online. See you again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Jacinda Ardern has welcomed Facebook's move to ban live streaming for those who post live content which violates its hate speech policies. The government is calling for public feedback on its proposals for a tougher regime to stop drug drivers getting behind the wheel. A Wellington woman is petitioning the government to make all vaccinations mandatory for children. The Department of Conservation says a spate of kakapo deaths from a deadly fungal infection is unprecedented, and master waka builder and navigator Sir Hiki Nukumai Busby has been laid to rest at Pukupoto in the far north. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
This is not an accidental attack.
Lately is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Young people want to have their own experiences and they want to learn for themselves.
Live with local, national and international